big fan of deviled eggs, and for years I've wanted to make a form that can be a serving dish for deviled eggs. And just recently I kind of came up with an idea on making a slab built deviled egg tray that will, you can see it's bumpy. It almost looks like a giant turtle shell from the outside. I just made this yesterday, so it's still in the leather hard stage, but I'm going to show you the technique that I have used to make this, and I think it worked rather well. So let me set this aside and I'll get my stuff. I'm going to be using a drape mold, which is a big oval drape mold from Bamboo Tools. I have a little base which screws on in place. I'll put links to these in the video. It's a really nice wooden mold where you can just drape a slab over. There are many different ways that you can use these, and I have different videos on some different techniques. But what I'm going to do is just use a straight up slab without texture to put over this. I'm going to be making my slab, probably around 1/4 of an inch thick. And I'm going to use a slab straight off the block, which the nice thing about that means that I don't need to wedge it. I do have some slab sticks here. I've shown these in various videos. Slab sticks are hardwood pieces which come in different thicknesses. These are the 1/4 inch thick strips. I have chosen to paint on the bottom edge of my slab sticks because when I use them at school with my high school students, they sometimes have not been the best about paying attention to the thickness that they have. So by color coordinating them, you know, I can tell them, oh, use the red sticks for that because they're the 1/4 inch. Just telling them use the 1/4 inch sticks without markings is a little bit more difficult for the kids to be accurate with. All right, so when I start rolling from a large block, and if you wanted to use, say, a slab roller, I do have a video, especially for my students. I have a video on how to use the North Star slab roller that we have at school. I am at home, and I used to have a slab roller, but I sold mine because I just took up a lot of space, and I very rarely ever used it. So I am going to start off by kind of stretching it in all directions, and I like to flip because when you start rolling a block of clay, the particles kind of have to stretch a little bit and realign, and it starts to become quite plastic. This clay that I'm using is the Laguna B mix with grog, and it usually seems rather stiff right out of the bag, but as you start rolling it, it just kind of suddenly becomes super plastic. And same with throwing. You have a square hunk that you cut off the block, and then when you start wedging it, it just becomes really nice and plastic. Now you can see I did take quite a bit of time to stretch sideways to make sure I have enough width side to side, but now I'm just trying to get my length. going to hold my mold over here and just trim down a little bit of the extra right now. It'll make it a little bit easier to roll out if I just trim off some of the excess. Keep picking it up after every roll so it doesn't really get stuck down to the table. Okay, now when you're down to the point of the sticks, you're going to hear the contact with the wood, and I can just hear the contact with the wood at this point. So I know that I'm down to my final depth that I need to be. All this scrap that I'm trimming away, I will end up by spritzing it down, putting it back in a bag so it's all moist and wedgeable again. Okay, now once I have it rolled out, I'm going to rib the surface. When I rib the surface of a slab, not only is it smoothing it, more importantly, it is compressing the particles. Slabs need to be compressed for strength. If you skip this step, sometimes you're fine, but I always prefer to do this. I think it makes your slab a good deal stronger. Now the rib that I happen to be using is a Mud Tools yellow rib. The yellow ribs have a flexibility to them which are really quite nice. I will put links in the video description to the various tools that I'm using. In fact, I have a link to a Google Doc that I made of a whole bunch of Amazon links. Especially if you're in the US, I have no idea if the Amazon links work in other countries or not. But you can see. All right. There we go. Okay. So now I have my slab is ribbed and I'm ready to drape this over my mold. Now, here's the thing about creating, actually I'm going to get a board and set this on. Okay, I'm just going to set the slab on a wear board to the side until I get this mold ready. All right, now to prepare this mold to create the bumps for the deviled egg shapes, I have made a whole bunch of small little, like egg type indents. The way that I did that was I just took a ball, okay, I tossed it down on the table so it flattened it on one side, and then I basically just kind of formed it with my fingers to look somewhat like an egg, and then with a little bit of water, doing this on the table typically, I would smooth the egg kind of shape out so it has a nice flat bottom. Okay, so I made 24 of these for the first one because it can fit a dozen eggs that are cut in half. So these are the ones that I made before. If you see white on here, it's because I have a little bit of cornstarch. So the cornstarch is there because I have to dust them so the clay doesn't get stuck. If I have any with dents in them, I'm just trying to fix them as I put them out here. So one thing that I'm thinking about is I am trying to put the ones that perhaps have a bit more depth on the bottom area. And then ones that might be a little bit more shallow, I'm putting a little bit toward the outside. Okay, now I'm going to spread these out so they're not really touching. I need to have room in between them so when I put the slab on, I can get the slab up between the shapes. So I'm trying to leave, about 1/4 of an inch. Now, some of these, they may not want to stick very well at this point. So I'm just going to add a little moisture to the bottom, see if I can get them to stick to the mold a little bit better. And I think what I might end up by doing is probably bisque firing these little guys. This is only the second one I've ever made, so I just made them yesterday, so I haven't had a chance to bisque fire anything. But, oops, is this, oh, that's the new one that I made. So I'm just going to count. 6, 12. Yep, 24. Okay, so now with them arranged on there, I'm going to do the next step is I don't want them to get stuck to the actual slab that I'm going to put on there. So for this, I'm going to use some cornstarch. That's what you saw on these earlier, the white stuff. So I'm just dousing them pretty good with cornstarch because I want them to release and pop out easily. That seems like that should be pretty good. Okay, cornstarch won't affect the clay, it'll be fine when it fires. Okay. All right, so just try to lay it on there, try to center it as much as I can. Drape this down. Okay, and now this is the part where you're going to press it between them. So I have a nice plastic slab, so when I press, it should not be causing any cracks on the front side. Going to work nice and slowly. You can use, if you wanted to use, say, like a pouncing bag, you could do that. I could use maybe a towel. I could use a bag over something like this to prevent a texture. Okay. Or I could come in here with a sponge. So my goal is to stretch the clay around them slowly. I don't want to stretch it too quickly. Too quickly and you can get a rip. Okay, I feel like I have pressed the clay down between the little egg shapes. Now I'm going to trim away the extra clay from off the mold. Now, my key is I'm going to trim it right up next to the mold. I like to use a needle tool for this, and I'm going to go at it from underneath, and I'm going to allow the needle tool to ride on the bottom edge of the wooden mold. This is appropriate for plaster molds as well. You want to always be careful not to damage or scratch your mold, so I like to ride it from underneath there like that. Okay, so it's now trimmed away. It is very plastic, so my goal at this point is I want to get it leather hard. Now, getting something like this leather hard, it's very important that you dry it slowly and evenly. So we want to put a towel over it, and if I'm going to leave it for like 24 hours, I'm going to put a towel and a bag just to be on the safe side. So a big heavy towel. So I'm going to use like a bath towel sort of thing like this, a big heavy towel. I could do a second layer if I wanted to, but then I will also put a bag over it because I know that I'm not going to be able to finish this at all today. I'm going to leave it sit on here for about 24 hours and I'll come back tomorrow and check it. Okay, I have just flipped over the deviled egg tray. It is leather hard. It's on the little soft side of leather hard. I just removed it from the mold by flipping the mold upside down, and I set it here on my table. I'm going to go ahead and just remove all of the little egg-shaped molds that were in there. I will set these aside. I'll put them in a little container. So if I want to reuse them again tomorrow or something, I can. And when they dry, I will pop them in a bisque kiln so I can bisque fire them. But you can see that it's holding its shape without the little molds in there. It is stiff enough that it can stand. After I get all these out, I'm going to put a little decorative trim piece on the edge. It will add a little bit of stability, and it will also be pretty. So there we go. Okay, so with all of these out, I'll just set these aside and I'll get out some fresh clay for that trim piece. Okay, so here is some fresh clay that I'm just going to wedge up. It was actually scrap clay from earlier. And I am going to do 2 trim pieces. I'm going to make 2 of them to put around. I think it'll be easier than trying to make one massively long one. And I'm going to start off with making a couple of coils that are about, probably about pinky or finger thick. And if you've not seen my coil video, there's a simple trick to try to keep coils round, and that is twist the ends of the coil in opposite directions, and also make sure that you're trying to use the full length of your palm. Oops. Of course, when I'm sitting here at a table with a limited amount of space, it's a little harder to do a full roll. There we go. Okay, so it's about, I would call it close to pinky thickness. Okay, so now I'm just going to give it a little bit of flattening. I'm going to just use a small roller, kind of flatten it a little bit so it doesn't rotate on the table when I go to do this next part. Now for this part, I'm going to use a decorative texture roller, one of those MKM rollers that I used on the another video. Okay, now to prep this for attachment, I'm going to do a little bit of scoring right on the edge. Flip this upside down, and I'm also going to score on the back side of this. Okay, and to prep this for application, I'm going to add some slip or some water. If I had prepared slip for my throwing water, I would just use that. Okay, and then I'm going to set this directly on the edge, the scored sides together. Okay, and then I need another coil, doesn't have to be quite as long, for the remaining section. Probably about a 13, 14 inch piece that I'll need. Want to get it the same thickness as the first one. And honestly, it probably would have been better to make both of the coils at the same time before I flatten it out. Backside again. And I did not mention it, but I put a bevel on the ends where these coils are going to meet, and the bevel allows a bit of an overlap where the two coils join, and it just makes for a nice clean join so you don't have gap. Okay, I'm just gonna scoot this over here. Now I'm going to take my fingers and I'm gonna kind of press the coil down, surrounding it, so it kind of curls over the edge. Okay, I have the coil basically wrapped over the edge. Remember that it was a flattened coil. And then one of the last things that I want to do is I'm just going to clean up the interior a little bit with the paintbrush. Clean a little bit of the excess slip, score marks, anything like that. rest of the cleanup on the back, I'm going to wait until tomorrow when it's just a little bit stiffer. It is still a little bit on the flexy side right now. And when it's a little bit stiffer and less sticky here, I'll also take the roller and probably just retexture a little bit just on the interior edge. Okay, here are the finished fired glaze results of my deviled egg holders. You can see that I ended up by using accent glaze to help bring out the texture. With the red glaze that I used, it was not a great texture showing glaze. It wasn't a celadon or anything. It's rather opaque, so I brushed the red glaze on, sponged it off on the high points, so it showed the texture a little bit more. And then I did wax the little bottoms of the little dimples before I ended up by brush glazing the blue and then the kind of the greenish color to that. I did make another one that I didn't show. It's a smaller one, which is kind of nice when you just have fewer eggs, but I did glazing in a similar manner. Obviously on this one, I left it a little bit curvy on the outside and I did not put a texture. But hopefully that will inspire you. You can use any shape of mold to do the same sort of thing. And if you end up by making any, send me a picture. I'd love to see what you did.